I'm Ola'pi from Ola'pi Creative, and welcome to Conversations by Water, a weekly Facebook live stream where we sit waterside with Wavemakers to share unfiltered, intimate, and inspiring conversations exploring what it takes to drive change locally and globally. Our mission is to create a ripple effect and empower you to affect change in your lives and communities too.
70% of the surface of planet Earth is covered in water. Also, our brain, our heart, and our lungs consist of 70% water.
That's the epitome of what the ocean is to me. It's just like my heart and soul, and it's love and it's connection.
It was something that was going to stick with him for quite a while.
I mean, read lots of books. Books will motivate you. Experience things. Experiences will motivate you. Watch interviews like this.
And I have to say, being able to go out and make an impact.
How many people do you interact with every day? You can be a change maker for all of those people.
Now it's time for us to say, okay, everybody's had their chance. Now it's time to say, we're ready. We're going to kick it off, and we're going to start making our beach the most environmentally friendly.
The faster you're going to fall in love with water, the longer and happier you're going to live.
And
We love water! We love you! Thank you!
Good morning, Wavemakers. How are you all out there this morning? It is a Wednesday morning. It is a beautiful Wednesday morning here in South Florida. And this is your friend Paola from Ola'pi Creative. And today I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Conversations by Water. I'm so excited to be coming to you this morning from Ola'pi Park, which is just off of 15th Street. Just east of 95 over in Fort Lauderdale. So Davie 95, that's where you find Ola'pi Park. It's a beautiful park here in Fort Lauderdale. It's one of these public spaces that is, of course, right on water. And so I love coming here. It's a really nice little hidden spot, great place for picnics. And of course it's free, and of course allows you to get in your water fix. And I'd like to say hello and welcome to Janine. And I see our dear friend Lizzie is also joining us, so I'll bring her here on in just a second. But thank you so much, Janine, for joining. It's so fun to see you. And you're right, it is a chilly morning here in South Florida for once. I think it's in the 60s today. We have that warm sunshine that's always nice and good. But I definitely have many layers. I even have, check this out. I even brought my gloves. They're fingerless gloves, so they're not true gloves, right? Just in case it was going to be that cold. But, you know, we're such wimps down here in South Florida. Anytime it dips below 70 degrees, it's a thing. And I do have my coffee, nice to keep me warm. So cheers, Janine, to your coffee. It's 52 degrees. Get out of town. I don't believe that one bit. That's insane. I can't believe we're out here in this freezing cold weather. Now, I bet our guest, Lizzie, has a lot to say about that as far as freezing cold. She's coming to us from a little bit further away. Actually, I'm going to find her right here. Hey, Stu. Nice to see you. I'm giving you a wave. So, there's Lizzie. I am going to see if she can join us here for our live chat. This is so fun. I got a chance to meet Lizzie in person just a couple months ago. Lizzie, if you can just give me a wave, and that way I can bring you on, I think that will work better. I met Lizzie just a couple months ago at the Blue Mind Summit that was taking place here in Miami, and I had heard about her work before through another outlet. And she does something that's really unique, and she does an amazing thing with bringing in Blue Mind Science into her practice. And so let's see if I can get her to come on board with us. All right. Lizzie, I am adding you in now. Oh, it's such a great morning. This is so fun. And so Lizzie's, as we wait for Lizzie to come on board here, I want to find out where you all are coming from. If some of you are coming from the Southeast, how you're faring in that blizzard situation that we had going on up there. It's because of your cold weather that we're getting cold weather. So unfortunately, I'm sorry that you all have to deal with all this snow. But sometimes it's a nice change of pace, I would say. At least for us down here in Florida, you know, we get a chance to put on different layers and use different parts of our wardrobe, which is exciting. So I'm wearing boots today instead of my traditional flip-flops, which is the normal beach-going fare that we have normally on our day-to-day. And so Lizzie is going to be coming to us from a little bit further away, across the pond, to be precise. So we're trying to add her on now. We're just waiting for her to join in on this conversation. Ooh, we have another beautiful vessel. Hey!
Third time lucky.
How's it going?
It's going well. As soon as I started pressing buttons, it was all a bit squirrely.
Oh, look at you. Wow,
There's
thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much for joining us today, Lizzie. Welcome to Conversations by Water. How are you?
I'm very good, if not technically challenged. But we made it.
No, this is amazing. I mean, we are coming from a very long distance away, completely different time zones. So please, everybody, please meet our dear friend, our guest today on the show, Lizzie. Tell us where you're coming from.
I'm coming from Perranporth in Cornwall, so down in the southwest of the UK. And I live and work on this beach, which you can't actually see because it's a little bit bright. Let me take you outside. I'm going to try and, there you go.
Ooh.
But just give you a little bit of a view. So we have a beach here called Perranporth Beach, which is 3 miles of beach. It'll probably disappear again when I come back on screen. But yeah, in the southwest of Cornwall. And I've no idea what the temperature is, but it's actually really bright and crisp and beautiful weather to be out and about in a December daytime. And it's morning for you. So good morning. It's afternoon here.
Yes, I know, right? So it's 2 p.m. by you, GMT time. I have my coffee. It's our 9 a.m. coffee time here in South Florida. So I love this. This is the neatest thing about technology, being able to communicate in this way and get a chance to see other blue backyards. So is that all a protected area where you are?
So we are on the edge of an area of outstanding natural beauty. So we have a dunes formation. Again, I probably could show you. There you go. So I'll just take you outside for a moment. Risky, highly risky. But we have a dunes formation here. The only pub on a beach in the UK. So pretty good, pretty cool. But we're in an area of outstanding natural beauty, and it's also a triple SI, so a site of specific scientific interest. So we have a lot of wildlife both in the dunes, but also obviously there's the marine aspect here as well. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your blue backyard. That's so neat. I was just telling the folks that here I'm sitting just at one of our public parks here in Fort Lauderdale, and a lot of these parks are nestled right against these canal systems, the finger canals that come off of the main intercoastal. And so we are known as the Venice of the Americas, and this is one of the reasons, because we have all of these neat canal systems that run through our backyards. So it's so pretty.
Really beautiful. And different wildlife. Do you have manatees there or not where you are?
Yes, absolutely. We definitely have manatees. They'll come right up here in the canals, right in people's backyards. And especially this time of year, as the water temperatures get a little colder on the ocean side, they come in looking for warm water in these protected canal systems. So it's like manatee fever all over here.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So Lizzie, please, if you don't mind, give us a little introduction. And one of the first things that I like to find out from folks is, what is their connection to water?
Okay, so what is my connection to water? It's probably easier to answer what isn't my connection to water, in that we are all water. Grew up spending a lot of time around the water and in the water. So it's a place of peace and harmony, and basically a really beautiful space to get away and play. So a very playful space for me. And I'm really lucky in that I work by the water. So my role in terms of how I'm connected with water is everything I do is related to being around the ocean. So my water is definitely ocean rather than necessarily lakes or rivers or streams. But I work as a coach out on the beach. And for my recreation, I volunteer with British Divers Marine Life Rescue, so rescuing things like seals, and Surfers Against Sewage, which is a ocean conservation charity here in the UK. So whether it's my recreation or whether it's my work, everything that I do is near, in, on, or underwater. So yeah, love it. As you know, exactly. my blue mind friend.
Exactly, it all makes sense. So You're in a really interesting field. So you're in coaching now, and this is where Going Coastal Blue comes into play. That's your coaching practice. And if you can tell us, it's a very specific kind of coaching, and you also talk about MBITS and NLP and all these acronyms. Please describe a little bit more about that. I think it's fascinating, this field of coaching that you're into.
Okay, so there's a few aspects of coaching that I train. So I train NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, which if we take that into an environmental psychology field, it's predominantly what you pay attention to, how you perceive what you pay attention to, and then how that results in the way that you behave towards each other and the world at large. So it's looking at patterns and habits and tendencies. And I train coaches to use NLP within their practice. I also coach and train MBIT, which is heart, head, and gut alignment. So really connecting in with the neuroscience of the heart, the head, and the gut, so that we can make decisions from a really aligned space. So from a space that we're really aware of the ecology and the ecosystem of the choices that we make. And that's very much heart-centered practice. It's around connecting in with, well, what's really important from a values point of view, and then coming from that space from a decision point of view. I teach yoga, so that again comes from the heart. That's about connection and ecosystems and enabling people to be more authentic in the way they express themselves in the world. So through the body and through the mind, so quietening some of the chatter and the stories that our head can create. And then essentially what I do is I work as a coach out in the littoral zone, so the zone between land and sea. It's a space that's continually in transition. So it lends itself, as those of us that spend a lot of time around the water know, that space, because it's in continual transition, it lends itself to facilitating change, because nothing around you when you're walking around the beach is static. Every single grain of sand is moving and everything is in continual transition. And I use a lot of landscape metaphor. So out in this space, I gave you a very brief view of the dune system, for example. But if you look at the shape and the colours and the texture and the form of the landscape, it lends itself to metaphor. So getting connected with more of the analog qualities of the space that we exist within, and then thinking about how do they relate to us as human beings in the way that we interact with others. So we talk about, I don't know if you can see, edges and gradients. So we might look at that sort of formation of land and look at, well, where does the land end and where does the sea begin? And therefore, talking about boundaries and what does that highlight in relation to boundaries that we have, and where are boundaries good and where are boundaries less good. So it's not about saying one is right and one is wrong. It's actually about navigating that space between. Or we might look at grains of sand and say, how long have they been on the planet? Well, that grain of sand's probably come from a rock formation that was there thousands and thousands of years ago. So we talk about things like deep time, and that we're not here for very long. So if we're not here for very long, we better do meaningful stuff. So that sort of thing, and lots more. So
it's so beautiful. And it's when you put it in that sense, being in these transitory spaces and relating that back to our own emotional states or spiritual states, how neat of a comparison that is. It's very clear when you put it in that way. One of the things that really struck me, I first heard an interview that you did with Lori Wilson over with the Blue Ocean Summit. And one of the things you had talked about was the neurons in our gut and versus in our heart, and how there really is such a thing. When people say, listen to your gut, there's a thing about that. Describe, can you go a little bit deeper into that and tell us the numbers, if you remember, the lobster brain, cat brain, all of that.
You got it nailed. Yes. So in the heart, there's a whole field of research looking at the neuroscience of the heart. And the heart has up to 120,000. Sound like a huge number when you compare it to the billions, nearly 100 billion in our head. But actually, those number of thousands of neurons is equivalent, as you said, to a lobster. And lobsters are capable of social activity. So they're capable of socializing and relating to one another. So our heart has a system within it that can make sense of things, and it can select information, and it can help us with our decision making. So when we get those moments where our heart's on fire, and we can actually feel that in that part of our body, that's very real information that's coming from our nervous system. And sometimes we might put that aside as woo-woo or underestimate that that's real information. And what MBIT does is it acknowledges that is your nervous system meeting the world and giving you information. So it's about tapping into those signals. So that's the heart. The head, we know, has got loads and loads. You're talking nearly 100 billion neurons, which is vast processing capability. But with that comes a real creativity that can be used helpfully, but it can also be used not so helpfully, as we know, because we make up stories about how we think the world is rather than actually looking at possibilities and opportunities. And then the gut for me is really, that's a really interesting area, because if you think, there's lots more emphasis now around diet, around really protecting our microbiome, so really protecting what goes into our system. And there's gut wisdom to be accessed. And the gut in itself has around 400 million neurons. So it's in the millions, whereas the heart's in the thousands. And the gut, that is, as you said, that's equivalent to a cat. And a cat is very capable of very complex activities. So it can protect itself. So it can defend itself. It can, again, relate with others. And so the gut is an area that actually we again, sometimes we trust our gut and we go with it. And sometimes we ignore those signals as not relevant, as some sort of sixth sense, versus actually that, again, it's real information. So the gut picks up on things like chemicals, so chemical changes within the air. We actually smell and taste whether something is threatening in the environment or whether something is welcoming within the environment. And MBIT is not about saying trust your gut all the time, but it's about saying align it. So it's actually about saying really check in with your heart. What do you want? What's important to you? What do you value? And that's the place of compassion and connection. It's about then checking in with your head and saying, okay, so what are all the creative ways that you can achieve that for collective wisdom rather than for just about me and mine? It's about we and us. And then the gut is about self. The gut is that space within us where we check in with, well, who are we in relation to this? What are we accountable for? And do we have the courage to act on that? So the gut is the place of doing. And it's about aligning those three when it comes to decision making. And this environment really welcomes the opportunity, because it takes out the background noise that we might have in a highly digital environment. It takes that noise out and it creates space for us to breathe into that space and slow down a bit and say, okay, so what's really important here? So that's in a nutshell, that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of MBIT. And sometimes people are aligned and sometimes they're not. So it's really working with exploring, is your head maybe doing the job of your gut? Or is your heart doing the job of your head? And actually, if we can work with our system in a very aligned and balanced way, then we're using our nervous system in the best possible way to make the best possible choices. And for me, environmental activism, it's really important that our choices are made where we leave the lightest footprint possible.
And a lot of all of this is it's very intuitive, like I said, we always revert back to listen to your gut, listen to your heart when trying to make decisions. But the neat thing about it, the extension of it, is that this is actually all very much science-based, and we're seeing the same thing with these blue spaces. As we always talk about, we always had this intuitive connection and draw to water, but now we're seeing that there's a science behind it. What is it about blue spaces that puts us in this amazing state to embrace these decision-making principles?
I think there's lots of things. There's lots of science backing up what happens to us when we're in blue space. Certainly around things around using our senses and how our senses relate with blue space. And as part of the Blue Mind team, as you are, we promote making that common knowledge, making that awareness that water is medicine, common knowledge. For me, one of the things that I think that I notice happen most often when we're in blue spaces is we have to be very, very present in the now. So if we go out surfing, it's no point daydreaming. The water's moving around us. We have to be here and now and attentive and aware. And for me, what I notice with my clients is their breathing changes. So I love breath. I love breath as a yoga teacher. I love exploring what happens with our breath when we change the pattern of breathing. And for me, when people arrive in this space, you see them visibly exhale. You see them visibly, slow down, quieten the background noise and their senses, and that creates space for their senses to open up. Their heart rhythms change. Your heart rhythm changes when your breath changes. So actually our ability to connect in with that wisdom and feel connected rather than separate from. So for me, I think the breath is the biggest thing as a coach that I notice change dramatically. And then a lot of the tools and techniques around connecting with the space and using language around the space and ideas of metaphor, they're the addition. And actually quite often it's just silence, and the space will do it for you. The space will do a lot of the work for you.
And a lot of it comes right back down to reconnecting us to nature, reconnecting us to these blue spaces What is it about now, do you think, that has us so disconnected, and why is there such a need now for this type of coaching?
I think screen time, the amount of screen time that people are spending is, we fail to connect. It's interesting how you can see people sitting over a dinner. They might have even gone out to spend dinner together. And even in this beautiful environment, the space behind me, there's a patio area here where people can sit and eat in the summer, and they'll be sat there looking at a screen. There's this bizarre idea of missing out. You might miss out on something, and this scrolling mentality where we're overwhelmed with information that we scroll rather than pausing and slowing down. And I think I think generally people come for coaching, either they've lost a little bit of meaning, so there's a bit of, they're going through the motions and they're moving through life so quickly they've realized they haven't really checked in with values, or they're actually overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed, and actually they don't really know what purpose they said. But purpose and meaning, certainly, I think, is a lot of the time missing. And status, I think, needing to look good. I think one of the things, this space, nobody can compete with this space. Nobody, I can see yours, but you can't really see mine because the light's a bit tricky. But you can't compete with the awe and the beauty that blue spaces provide for us, and they're reflective spaces. So it's needed. It's certainly needed in terms of when we look at both your side of the planet and ours, the political chaos that we're in, social chaos that we're in. Actually being able to pause and become a little bit more coherent and grounded, and simplifying and stripping back from the need to project a certain point of view, or project a certain persona, versus actually feeling that you've brought yourself to the day fully.
And I read somewhere that by including purpose and having purpose in your life, that can give you an extra 7 to 14 years on your life, just by having purpose.
Awesome.
It's amazing. Yeah,
and
exactly.
If you apply that purpose for good, then that's a pretty good. That's a pretty good.
Well, right. And I think that also becomes a neat point in your kind of coaching too, is that, people are very, they're intuitively connected to these concepts, the MBIT and blue space. But when you actually bring it to light for them now, they have a reason to be very conscious in their practice and in their time that they are spending by blue space. And so suddenly it's not just that you're there, but you're conscious of the benefits, which ends up benefiting you more. And then you're also very conscious of how it feels when you're not in a healthy blue space versus a blue space that, is littered or has sewage. And so then hopefully that becomes another trigger for wanting to always feel good by being around healthy blue spaces.
Really, certainly. I mean, this morning I've been coaching out here this morning, and we're walking along the Strand line with my client, and I'm picking up litter because it's there, and we're part of that environment, not separate from that environment. So the fact that I'm picking up litter is then in somebody's peripheral awareness. So I think actually we can influence people's sense of connection by helping them recognize that they are part of that environment, not separate to that environment. And so yes, so unhealthy blue spaces actually can have a very significantly negative impact on our health and well-being. But also those healthy spaces, they are underutilized and under-recognized. They tend to be the terms that we use. They are, water is medicine, but we're talking about healthy water being medicine. So because you've had the red tide, haven't you?
Yeah, and it was extremely, this is the worst year that we've ever seen it, because this year there was additional influxes of, there was extra rain that brought down runoff from fertilizers and extra nutrients into the inland waterways, which caused its own freshwater algal bloom. And then when that washed out to Oceanside, where the normal red tide exists, it was feeding the red tide. And so this year in particular, that red tide on the West Coast, although it's naturally occurring, it got so large that it caught up into the Florida loop current, which brought it down around the south end of Florida. And that's why we saw it here on the East Coast for the first time in a decade. So as for as awful as an event that was, because with these red tides, of course, they also cause respiratory distress. Not only do they harm the wildlife and have these fish kills, and they kill manatees and all, but they also affect humans. And, unfortunately, as is typical, a problem has to be so big before people notice. But I did appreciate that everybody was asking and they were concerned and they wanted to know what was going on and what they could do. So it's, you know, it's one of those kind of double-edged sword kind of situations where unfortunately it takes a big problem to wake people up. But once they're awake, you know, you can't not forget what's happening.
Yeah, yeah, and that's, you know, that's the blue mind ethos is very towards orientated. It's about protecting what you love, and it's about, you know, we're encouraging people to have that very towards mentality, and at the same time, the likes of most ocean conservation, it's also addressing the other aspect of this is how bad it is, and we do need to wake up to that, because there's an insidious change happening, and we're not really noticing until something dramatic occurs.
Right, exactly. So I understand you've also been doing some work with Plymouth University over there.
So, not so much doing work with, but we have the Blue Health team over here, which is I was doing some work with them, yeah, which was around breath and blue space. So really exploring what happens when we connect with blue space, and what changes in terms of our breathing when we do that. We're still number crunching on that, but we're really lucky here in Cornwall in that we have a hub. We have a hub of Blue Health, which used to be the European Centre for Environment and Human Health, and that's where a lot of the research in the UK comes out of. So looking at things like proximity to water and our health. So actually what happens when we live in locations that are closer to water. And that's even mitigating for wealth, you know, even mitigating for things like affluence. That it's shown that living near water has a positive health benefit for us. We've recently had out of Plymouth, so I certainly stay very well aware of what goes on in Plymouth and the University of Exeter, which is predominantly Blue Health University of Exeter. Recently, a really interesting report which was around marine litter. And when we see fishing litter, because the context is we expect to see things like fishing nets when we go to the beach. When we see marine litter that's things like ghost fishing net, we feel it's less disgusting to us, and we feel less inclined to do something about it than when we see litter that's from things like sandwich packets or crisp packets and bottles, which I think that's quite interesting in terms of for me, I find that really interesting in terms of our psyche around feeling connected to versus disconnected from. So if we don't see something as our issue, then actually we tend not to do anything about it. So certainly the whole Blue Health movement around research into blue space is really important. And the work at Plymouth, yes, so it was a while ago, but the work at Plymouth was certainly around our breath, which is fascinating, just how we breathe differently when we connect with blue space versus grey space. But we don't have the numbers yet for that. We have intuitively what we sense happens, but we're still crunching numbers for that. So yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'm still looking forward to hearing more about that science and seeing what comes out of that. What is it that actually got you into coaching in the first place?
Oh, coaching. So my background's organisational health, basically organisational development and change management. So I went into an HR role, so learning and development and exploring change and leadership. So I worked for a large organisation in the UK, which had multi-sites, so around 800 sites across the UK. It's a big stationers called WH Smith. And I worked in the learning and development team, and then ended up heading up learning and development for stores. But predominantly my role was around leadership and change. So exploring how people negotiate change. So I got heavily interested in things like NLP from that. But prior to that, my prior career had been sports therapy, and I'd also worked in animal rescue. And they sound really disparate. You kind of think, well, what does animal rescue have to do with sports, and what does that have to do with corporate learning and development? But essentially, the link that I can see between them is they're all about paying attention. They're all around using your senses to connect. So whether you're in animal rescue and you're exploring what's going on for this creature right here, or you're in a board meeting with somebody who's posturing and showing a bit of power, and you go, what's going on for this creature here? Or somebody's failing to be motivated in their fitness plan, and you're exploring, well, what is it that's going on beyond the behavior that I'm seeing? So coaching for me came from a place of curiosity. It came from a place of exploring way beyond the behavior into, well, how does this person see their role? And how are they showing up? Are they showing up in a way that's fully them, or are they conforming to some expectation that's externally sourced? So, and what I love about coaching is I don't have the answers. I'm there to hold space, and I'm there to ask good questions, and maybe play with some techniques, and predominantly for me, really use the environment and enable people to connect with the environment. But the answers are going to come from the individual that you're spending time with. So it allows a lot of creativity. It allows a lot of creating narratives, so.
And just like you said, I mean, you're literally holding space for people to have their aha moments, as they do when they're under and near water. I think this might be someone Gem Toms. I wanted to share with you what they said. Lizzie is our plastic-free beauty for our local town. The impact she has had and still is having has been amazing. You were
Jem.
so well loved.
Thanks, Jem. Thanks, Jem. I can't see any comments, so thank you, Jem. That's really sweet. We have SAS, Surfers Against Sewage, have got this amazing campaign called, it started off as plastic-free coastlines, and it's now plastic-free communities. So we've got, in Perranporth, we've got an amazing community who are out on the beaches in really high winds, whatever the weather, they're out there really, really protecting what they love, really protecting that space. So
so awesome. What great work. You're doing all kinds of wonderful things, and they all sound like they very much align with your values. You're such an example for living an inspired life. What is your favorite part of what you do?
It's when somebody really sees the connection that they've got to the ripple effect, basically the connection that they have with how their actions follow through. And they have, not only do they have the aha moment, it's when they take action on that. When somebody takes action, and that action has a wider systemic approach, or influence. So we talk in terms of ecosystem. You are part of the ecosystem. You're a humble part of the ecosystem. You're not the top of the food chain. You just happen to be one aspect of an ecosystem. So those moments where somebody really recognizes their connection and how their footprint makes a difference, they're the moments that you get say, yeah, you've got it, and you see people light up, because you see there's a degree of joy that doesn't come from an internalized ego space of pride. It's joy. You see people expressing themselves joyfully and actually making a wider difference and helping other people live more fulfillingly. So yes, it's those moments that you think, yeah, and then they know that they've done it. They know they've done it. So it's where people actually own their actions, and their actions have a difference. And those moments, that's what we live for. Those moments where it's all very well somebody having a little inspired moment on the beach, and you see the aha. And we get, as coaches, we get a lot back from that. You go, yes, they've got it. But actually, it's they need to go away and then do something as a result of that, or stop doing something as a result of that. And that for me is the difference that will make the difference, I think.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point too, that although it may start with the individual, it's the ripple effect that then happens that extends to their family, to their colleagues, to their community, and now everybody. It's just that contagious joy factor, and who wouldn't want a happier community in that sense? So I love that. So how is it that folks can become involved in this kind of coaching? You actually train people in this methodology and these processes, as well as doing coaching. So where can people find out more about all of that?
So they can find out more about that through Going Coastal Blue. They can also find out more about that by connecting in with the Blue Mind movement. So that whilst I train coaches and whilst I do coach at the beach, there's a global movement of people like yourself, like Janine, who was on earlier, who actually really connect with water, and really they live it and they breathe it. We call it living blue. You actually live blue. So certainly connecting with people that love the same things as you. But yes, if you want to connect in with me personally, I coach out on the beach here in Perranporth, but I also do coach online, which isn't quite the same because you're getting a screen version. But it enables us to connect globally, which I think is beautiful. I think it's beautiful. I think that's really lovely to maintain that connection with like yourselves and Scotty. You had Scott on the other day, who's part of our team from Alaska. Team Blue Mind. And actually it is one ocean. It is one ocean, and that's essentially when we start to see those links and connections, suddenly it's a globe. There's a global connection. So yes, if people want to connect in with me, Going Coastal Blue or the Blue Mind movement, because we're developing coaching programs specifically looking at blue health and specifically modeling some of the stuff that that we've been doing for a long time, nearly 10 years. January will be my 10th anniversary out on the beach, which is pretty cool.
Amazing. Right.
Really
That's
cool.
super cool.
Yeah,
I
very
love
blessed.
that. And we'll make sure, everybody, that we put those links down below so that you can have easy access over to Lizzi and learn more about her work, and of course follow her on all the social medias. She's super active in not only in the coaching community but also in this Blue Mind movement space. And she's one of the champions, actually, of the Blue Mind movement, and actually practicing it and putting this blue health to work. So before we go, I just have one last question for you. And what is it that matters to you?
The ecosystem matters to me. The ecosystem, love, exhibiting and expressing love and care and compassion, whether that's, and the ecosystem in terms of the ripple effects, that we're aware that our thoughts lead to our actions that lead, and actually there is, no matter whether we're thinking about the actions that we take around marine litter, or whether it's the actions that we take in terms of a word that we use or a smile that we might give. I bumped into a little old lady on the promenade a couple of months ago, and I don't think people had seen her. So actually being able to see people and connect and put the screens away for a moment and recognize that this is it. That's a very yogi type phrase, but this is it. This moment is the bit that we can influence. It's dreams and goals are really important, but the bit where we make a change is actually in the moment now. So that really matters to me, being aware of the ripple effect of our actions.
That's so beautifully said. Well, Lizzi, thank you so much for joining us today on Conversations by Water. It has been such a joy to speak with you and to learn more about your background. I mean, I've loved being able to connect with you over this time. And it's so neat. Look at this technology. We're at the beach.
I'm trying to get you. It's quite bright, isn't it? It's gone pretty bright, but you can kind of see it. You can kind of see it.
And the rain held off.
It did. It did. It's actually quite blue here. Not quite as blue as it is where you are, but it's still blue.
So blue.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Well, again, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your blue space with us all the way from the UK.
Thank you for everything that you do to celebrate blue and keep warm. It made me laugh that you think it's cold.
I know, I'm such a wimp.
I look forward to staying connected.
I do too, and I also look forward to seeing you in person and going to your beach over there. So awesome.
Really
well,
cool.
until next time, Lizzi, we'll be staying in touch. And thank you all so much for joining us and for watching this episode of Conversations by Water. Lizzi and I both wish you water, and we hope that you too can become the change that you'd like to see in the world. So we'll see you next time, Wavemakers. Thank you all so much. Bye, Lizzi.
Bye-bye.